Pressure is not proof that God has left you. It is often the evidence that he has begun. When God sets his hand on a life for purpose, he does not start by polishing the outside. He starts by crushing the inside. What looks like loss may actually be construction. What feels like breaking may be the sound of God building something that could not exist any other way. This is the mystery few understand, and many resist. When God builds a man, he first breaks him. Breaking is not God's cruelty, it is his craftsmanship. A builder does not smash a stone because he hates it. He strikes it because he sees what it can become. God never breaks a man to destroy him. He breaks him to deliver him from what would limit him. The breaking is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of becoming. Before strength can be trusted, pride must be confronted. Before influence can be released, character must be formed. Before a man can carry weight, he must learn how to bend without shattering. Breaking is often misunderstood as abandonment, yet in the economy of God, it is usually evidence that divine construction has begun. When pressure increases, when familiar support, tees are removed, and when life feels as though it is unraveling, the natural assumption is that something has gone wrong. But in God's design, breaking is rarely the sign of his absence. It is the mark of his involvement. God does not invest this level of attention in lives he intends to discard. He breaks what he plans to build because strong structures require deep foundations. Human nature interprets difficulty as rejection. When prayers seem unanswered and doors close unexpectedly, the heart wonders whether God has withdrawn his favor. Yet Scripture and experience consistently reveal that God often draws closest during the hardest seasons. The breaking is not God stepping away. It is God stepping in with precision. He is not reacting emotionally to failure or disappointment, but intentionally shaping the inner life. What appears to be chaos is actually order at work on a deeper level. God understands that untested strength is dangerous. Without breaking, confidence easily turns into arrogance, and gifting quickly becomes self-exaltation. So God allows circumstances that challenge a man's sense of control and competence. He brings moments where natural ability no longer produce results, where effort does not guarantee outcomes, and where knowledge cannot solve the problem. These moments are not meant to humiliate, but to recalibrate. God is teaching the heart that the source of life, direction, and power has always been him. The breaking often feels personal because it touches the very areas where identity has been placed. When success fades, relationships change, or familiar stability disappears, it exposes what the soul has leaned on for security. God does not remove these supports out of cruelty, but out of mercy. Anything a man depends on more than God eventually becomes a limitation. By allowing those things to be shaken, God is freeing the heart from false foundations so it can rest on what is unshakable. There is a deep emotional cost to this process. Confusion sets in, prayers feel heavier, and faith can feel fragile. Yet this tension is part of transformation. Faith that has never been tested remains theoretical. Trust that has never been challenged remains shallow. God permits the breaking so faith can move from concept to conviction. In the breaking, belief is no longer based on outcomes, but on character. A man begins to trust who God is and just what God does. Many abandon the process prematurely because they mistake pain for punishment. But punishment is about repayment, while breaking is about preparation. God is not settling a debt. He is investing in a future. The discomfort is not God expressing displeasure. It is God expressing commitment. He cares too much about destiny to allow a man to remain unrefined. If God were indifferent, he would leave a person untouched. The breaking proves that God has seen something worth shaping. What makes the breaking especially difficult is its hidden nature. Often there is no explanation, no timeline, and no immediate resolution. This silence can feel like neglect, but it is actually intimacy. God is working at levels that do not require public display, just as a seed breaks open. Underground, before it ever rises above the soil, God allows unseen pressure to produce visible strength later. The breaking is quiet because foundations are always laid below the surface. Over time, perspective begins to shift. The man who once asked why this was happening begins to ask what God is forming. The struggle that once felt meaningless starts to reveal its purpose. Endurance grows. Rakter deepens. Dependence on God becomes natural rather than forced. This internal transformation is the true evidence that the breaking is not destructive. Something is being built that did not exist before. Eventually, the man emerges with a steadiness that cannot be taught by success alone. He carries less illusion about his own strength and more confidence in God's faithfulness. He is no longer easily shaken because he understands that pressure does not signal abandonment. He knows firsthand that God's hand is often most active when life feels most uncertain. In hindsight, the breaking is seen for what it truly was, the doorway into maturity, depth, and lasting strength. God was not tearing life apart. He was rearranging it for purpose. The pain was never meant to destroy the man, to prepare him for what he could not yet carry. Breaking in the hands of God is never the end. It is the beginning of something far stronger, deeper, and more enduring than what existed before. One of the first and most necessary works God does in building a man is confronting his self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency feels like strength, confidence, and maturity, but in the spiritual realm, it often becomes the greatest barrier to growth. As long as a man believes he can carry his life, his calling, and his future by his own wisdom and effort, he will never fully experience the power of God working through him. God breaks self-sufficiency not to weaken a man, but to reconnect him to the true source of life and strength. From an early age, men are taught to rely on themselves, to be strong, to figure things out, and to control outcomes. While responsibility and discipline have value, self-reliance easily turns into pride when it replaces dependence on God. God knows that a man who trusts his own ability more than divine direction will eventually collide with limits he cannot overcome. So he allows circumstances where skill fails, planning collapses, and effort produces little fruit. These moments are not accidents. They are divine interventions designed to expose the illusion of control. The breaking of self-sufficiency often comes through exhaustion. A man reaches the point where trying harder no longer works. He prays, plans, pushes, and persists, yet nothing shifts. This exhaustion is not weakness, it is invitation. God is drawing the heart away from striving and outward surrender. When human strength reaches its end, divine strength finally has room to operate. God is not asking a man to stop working. He is asking him to stop carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. In this process, God reveals how easily confidence in self can replace trust in him. A man may still pray, still serve, and still believe, yet inwardly rely on his own understanding. God disrupts this subtle independence by allowing confusion and unanswered questions. The familiar strategies no longer work, and the usual solutions no longer bring peace. This discomfort is purposeful. God is teaching the heart that clarity does not come from control, but from communion. Breaking self-sufficiency also reshapes prayer. Prayer moves from presentation to desperation, from routine to relationship. Instead of informing God of plans, a man begins to seek God for direction. Dependence replaces assumption. Listening replaces rushing. This shift marks a deeper maturity, because true dependence is not passive, it is deeply engaged. A dependent man does not do less. He does what God directs rather than what ego prefers. There is humility formed in this breaking that cannot be learned. Through success. When self-sufficiency collapses, pride loses its grip. A man begins to acknowledge his limits without shame. He learns that weakness is not disqualification, but qualification for grace. God resists pride not because he is harsh, but because pride disconnects a man from the flow of divine help. When humility grows, grace increases. Dependence unlocks access to what self-reliance could never produce. This breaking also corrects the way a man measures strength. Strength is no longer defined by how much he can handle alone, but by how deeply he can trust God. Endurance becomes rooted in faith rather than force. Peace becomes possible even when outcomes are uncertain. The man who once panicked at loss of control now learns to rest in God's sovereignty. This inner shift is Eve. Evidence that God is building something far stronger than mere independence as dependence grows. Obedience becomes more natural. The man who no longer leans on his own understanding becomes sensitive to God's voice. He waits when God says wait and moves when God says move. He no longer needs constant reassurance because trust has replaced fear. This kind of obedience produces stability because it is guided rather than driven. God can entrust direction to a man who is not trying to prove himself. In time, the fruit of this breaking becomes visible. The man operates with greater wisdom, not because he knows more, but because he listens better. He carries responsibility without anxiety because he knows he is not the source. Pressure no longer crushes him because he has learned where to place. Dependence has made him resilient rather than fragile. Looking back, what once felt like loss of control is revealed as gain of clarity. God did not strip strength. He redirected it. He did not diminish ability. He aligned it. By breaking self-sufficiency, God established true dependence. And in that dependence, the man found strength that does not fail. What was broken was never meant to sustain him, and what was built will carry him for the rest of his life. One of the most painful yet necessary dimensions of God's work in building a man is the purification of his motives. Motives determine direction, endurance, and integrity, and God will not allow a man to carry destiny with a divided heart. The breaking often begins when God removes the very things that once affirmed a man's sense of worth, applause, recognition, influence, and visible success. What feels like loss is actually exposure. God is not attacking the work. He is examining the why behind it. Many begin their journey with sincere passion. Yet over time, the heart can subtly shift. Service becomes intertwined with approval, obedience with recognition, and calling with identity. God, who sees beneath actions, addresses these inner attachments. He strips away external validation, not to punish, but to reveal whether faithfulness remains when no one is watching. When affirmation disappears and the heart still chooses obedience, something eternal is being formed. The removal of validation creates a deep internal conflict. Without applause, a man must face uncomfortable questions about his worth. The silence that follows can feel unbearable because it exposes the dependence on others' approval. God allows this silence so the heart can relearn where identity comes from. Destiny cannot be sustained by validation because validation is unstable. People change, seasons shift, and crowds move on. If identity is tied to recognition, then faith becomes fragile. God breaks this dependency so a man can be ancho, read in something unchanging. In the breaking, God teaches the difference between calling and attention. Calling is rooted in obedience. Attention is rooted in response. When the two are confused, disappointment is inevitable. God removes the response so obedience can be purified. This is where many struggle, because obedience without recognition feels unrewarded. Yet God sees obedience itself as the reward. He's shaping a heart that does not need to be seen to remain faithful. As validation fades, a man begins to hear God more clearly. Noise often masks direction. Applause can drown out conviction. God quiets the external voices so his voice can become central again. This internal reordering is essential because destiny requires clarity. A man driven by approval will eventually compromise. See truth to maintain favor. God breaks the craving for validation so integrity can survive success. This purification also reshapes ambition. Ambition itself is not the enemy, but ambition fueled by ego will always seek visibility. God redirects ambition toward faithfulness rather than fame. The man who once measured impact by recognition begins to measure it by obedience. This shift produces PCE because faithfulness is within one's control while recognition is not. God frees the heart from chasing outcomes and anchors it in trust. The breaking reveals who a man serves when no one rewards him. When the platform disappears and the heart remains loyal, motive is clarified. God is not impressed by public devotion that collapses in private obscurity. He is forming men whose devotion is rooted in love rather than reward. This kind of faithfulness cannot be manipulated by praise or discouraged by criticism. Over time, the man who endures this purification becomes stable. He no longer rises or falls with opinions. Criticism does not crush him, and praise does not inflate him. His identity becomes grounded in God's voice rather than public response. This stability is critical because influence magnifies whatever is inside a person. God ensures the inside is anchored before the outside expands. There is a quiet strength that emerges from this process. The man learns to work diligently without recognition, to serve sincerely without applause, and to remain joyful without validation. He understands that God sees what others do not. This awareness produces integrity and consistency. He no longer needs constant reassurance because his confidence is rooted in divine approval. In the end, what God removes is replaced with something far greater. The hunger for validation is exchanged for security and identity. The need for recognition is replaced by confidence and calling. The fear of being unseen is replaced by trust that God is attentive. God builds a man who can stand and sue, success without being consumed by it, and endure obscurity without being diminished by it. What once felt like loss is revealed as freedom. God did not take away affirmation to starve the soul. He removed it to strengthen it. By purifying motives and destroying the need for validation, God prepares a man to carry destiny with integrity, endurance, and unwavering faithfulness. Hidden seasons are often the most misunderstood parts of a man's journey with God, yet they are the places where the deepest work is done. When momentum slows, visibility fades, and progress seems invisible, the heart naturally questions purpose. However, God does not measure growth by exposure. He measures it by depth. What appears to be stillness on the outside is often intense development on the inside. God intend. Shinli leads men into hidden seasons because public strength requires private formation. In a hidden season, activity is reduced so attention can be refined. God removes distractions, platforms, and sometimes even clarity so the heart can learn to listen again. The silence is not empty, it is instructional. In these moments, God teaches a man how to hear without noise and how to trust without evidence. This kind of listening cannot be learned in crowds. It is developed in isolation, where the only voice left to follow is God's. Hidden seasons expose the difference between purpose and performance. When there is no audience, no recognition, and no measurable progress, motivation is tested. A man discovers whether he is driven by calling or by response. God allows obscurity to strip away performance-based faith so authentic devotion can grow. What remains after visibility is removed reveals what truly matters to the heart. These seasons also build endurance. Immediate results often produce shallow faith, while delayed outcomes develop perseverance. God understands that endurance cannot be rushed. He allows time to stretch patience, disappointment to mature hope, and waiting to strengthen trust. A man who learns to remain faithful without visible reward becomes spiritually resilient. This resilience is essential because destiny will demand consistency long after excitement fades. In hidden seasons, God works on identity. Without titles, roles, or affirmation, a man must confront who he is apart from what he does. This confrontation can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. God does not want a man to be defined by function alone. When identity is rooted in activity, loss of function creates crisis. Hidden seasons realign identity with sonship rather than success, ensuring stability when roles change. Roots grow in darkness. Just as a tree develops its strength below the surface before rising tall, God builds internal capacity before external expansion. Hidden sea. Sons deepen faith, sharpen discernment, and strengthen character. These qualities are not visible, but they are foundational. When the storm comes, what is unseen determines what survives. God prioritizes what lasts over what looks impressive. God also uses hidden seasons to correct perspective. When movement slows, reflection increases. A man gains clarity about past decisions, patterns, and AT&T. Etudes. God brings awareness to areas that need healing, forgiveness, or surrender. Without the pressure of constant motion, The heart becomes receptive to correction. This is not regression, it is refinement. God is preparing the man to move forward without repeating old cycles. There is also intimacy formed in obscurity. When there is no audience to impress, the relationship with God becomes personal and honest. Prayer shifts from performance to conversation. Worship becomes expression rather than presentation. This intimacy becomes the anchor that sustains future responsibility. Public success without private intimacy always leads to emptiness. God ensures intimacy is established before influence is released. Many are tempted to escape hidden seasons prematurely. The discomfort, waiting can create anxiety and self-doubt. Yet rushing out of obscurity often leads to collapse later. God delays elevation not because he is withholding, but because he is protecting. What is released too early becomes a burden rather than a blessing. God waits until the inner life is strong enough to support the outer calling. When the hidden season ends, it often does so quietly. There is no dramatic announcement, only readiness. The man steps forward with confidence that does not depend on attention. He moves with wisdom that was formed in silence. He carries authority rooted in obedience rather than visibility. The season that once felt empty is revealed as essential. Looking back, the hidden season becomes sacred. The loneliness produced strength. The waiting produced clarity. The obscurity produced depth. God was not delaying destiny. He was preparing the vessel. What he builds in secret sustains a man in public, ensuring that success does not destroy what obscurity faithfully formed. Explain 5 keynote into 800 words and don't add subheading. One of the most challenging aspects of God's work in building a man is his decision to remove clarity in order to teach trust. Man nature craves certainty. The desire to know what will happen, how it will happen, and when it will happen feels essential to peace. Yet God often chooses the opposite path. He allows unanswered questions, unclear directions, and uncertain outcomes, not to confuse the heart, but to free it from the illusion of control. By breaking the need to control, God creates space for genuine faith and OBE. Science to grow. Control gives a false sense of security. When a man believes he understands the process, he feels protected from disappointment. But faith does not grow where everything is predictable. God does not reveal full plans because obedience is not meant to be based on explanations. It is meant to be rooted in trust. When God removes clarity, he exposes whether a man follows him for comfort or for truth. This is not punishment, it is spiritual formation. The breaking of control often begins when plans fail despite sincere effort. A man prays, prepares, and proceeds with confidence only to encounter unexpected resistance. Doors close without warning. Timelines shift without explanation. In these moments, frustration rises because the familiar sense of order is gone. God allows his disruption to reveal how tightly the heart clings to outcomes. What feels like chaos is actually an invitation to surrender. In this season, God teaches that faith is not the absence of questions, but the decision to obey without full understanding. Obedience that requires clarity is still conditional. God seeks unconditional obedience, obedience that flows from trust in his character rather than certainty about his methods. When a man learns to take steps without seeing the entire path, faith matures. Trust becomes relational rather than transactional. Breaking control also addresses fear. Control often masks anxiety. The desire to manage outcomes is usually rooted in the fear of loss, failure, or disappointment. God confronts this fear by placing the heart in situations where control is impossible. When fear surfaces, God does not condemn it, he invites surrender. Trust replaces fear when a man realizes that his safety does not come from understanding the future, but from being held by God in the present. As control loosens, listening becomes essential. Without a rigid plan to follow, the heart becomes sensitive to God's guidance. Dependence increases. Prayer becomes less about requesting outcomes and more about seeking direction. A man learns to pause, wait, and respond rather than rush ahead. This posture transforms obedience from a burden into alignment. God's will becomes less about effort and more about responsiveness. This process reshapes patience. Waiting without clarity is uncomfortable, yet it produces deep spiritual endurance. God teaches that waiting is not inactivity, it is trust in motion. A man who can wait without anxiety has learned to rest in God's sovereignty. This rest is not laziness, it is confidence that God is working even when progress is unseen. Breaking control also prevents premature decisions. When clarity is removed, impulsive action loses its power. A man learns to value timing over urgency. He discovers that obedience delayed can still be obedience, while obedience rushed can lead to regret. God builds discernment by slowing movement, ensuring that future steps are guided rather than driven. Over time, trust becomes instinctive. The man no longer needs to know everything to move forward. He has seen God's faithfulness enough times to rest in uncertainty. This trust produces peace that does not depend on circumstances. When storms come, he remains steady because his confidence is not in plans, but in God's presence. When clarity eventually returns, it does so with greater purpose. The man is no longer attached to outcomes, so he can follow direction without resistance. Control has been replaced by surrender, fear by faith, and anxiety by peace. God has built a heart that can obey even when understanding is incomplete. What once felt like loss of direction becomes evidence of growth. God did not remove clarity to confuse the man. He removed it to teach him how to trust. By breaking the need to control, God prepares a man to walk in faith that is resilient, obedient, and deeply rooted in relationship rather than certainty. Pain is one of the most misunderstood tools God uses in building a man. It is, viewed as something to escape, suppress, or question, yet in God's hands, pain becomes a powerful instrument of formation. God does not create pain for pleasure, nor does he ignore it when it comes. Instead, he redeems it. In the breaking, pain becomes a teacher, revealing what comfort never could. It exposes the heart, reshapes perspective, and produces maturity that ease could never develop. When pain enters a man's life, it strips away illusions. Strength that once seemed secure is tested. Confidence rooted in circumstance is shaken. In these moments, God allows the heart to feel its vulnerability, not to humiliate it, but to open it. Pain softens the places that pride hardens. It creates awareness of need, and need draws the soul closer to God. This closeness is not forced, it is invited through honesty. Pain also produces compassion. A man who has never suffered often struggles to understand suffering in others. Comfort can distance the heart, but pain connects it. When God allows a man to walk through disappointment, loss, or grief, he is shaping the ability to carry others with sensitivity. Words spoken from theory rarely heal, but words spoken from experience carry weight. Brokenness gives credibility to compassion. In the breaking, pain teaches patience. Immediate relief is rarely granted because growth requires time. God allows pain to linger long enough for transformation to occur. This waiting is not neglect, it is intentional. Through endurance, the heart learns to remain faithful even when relief is delayed. This kind of patience builds maturity because it is rooted in trust rather than circumstance. Pain also deepens wisdom. A man learns to discern what truly matters when superficial comforts are removed. Priorities shift, relationships are reevaluated, values are clarified. God uses pain to refine focus, stripping away distractions so the heart can realign with purpose. What once seemed essential loses its grip, and what truly matters gains PR. Mominence, there's also healing that only pain can reveal. Emotional wounds, unresolved trauma, and unhealthy patterns often remain hidden until pressure exposes them. God allows pain to surface these areas so healing can begin. Avoidance delays restoration, but confrontation invites freedom. Pain brings hidden issues into the light where grace can address them. As pain is endured with God, resilience forms. Resilience is not the absence of pain, but the ability to move through it without being destroyed. A man who has suffered and survived gains confidence that hardship is not final. This confidence is quiet but unshakable. It does not deny difficulty, it outlasts it. Pain also reshapes dependence. When comfort disappears, reliance on God increases. Prayer becomes more honest, worship more sincere, and faith more personal. God becomes more than a concept. He becomes refuge. This dependence does not weaken a man. It anchors him. A heart that knows where to run in pain is a heart that cannot be easily shaken. Over time, the man begins to see pain differently. It is no longer just something that happened to him. It becomes something that shaped him. He recognizes that without pain, certain depths of understanding, humility, and compassion would never have formed. What once felt like loss becomes recognized as gain. When God uses pain to build maturity, the result is a man who can walk with others through darkness without fear. He does not rush healing or minimize struggle. He understands that growth takes time. His presence becomes comforting because it is authentic. He airs patience because he has lived it. In the end, pain does not define the man, but it does refine him. God does not waste suffering. Every tear waters future strength. Every wound becomes a doorway to wisdom. Through pain, God forms a man who is not hardened by life, but softened by grace, mature in spirit, and equipped to carry others with compassion and understanding. Humility is not anything God adds to a man after he builds him. It is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without humility, no amount of gifting, knowledge, or strength can sustain what God intends to do. Pride creates resistance, but humility creates alignment. When a man is humble, he is positioned correctly under God's authority, and only in that position can true growth occur. God does not build on pride, because pride refuses correction, and anything that cannot be corrected cannot be strengthened. The process of breaking naturally leads a man toward humility. When strength fails, answers disappear, and control is removed, the heart is confronted with its limitations. This confrontation is uncomfortable, yet necessary. God allows these moments so a man can see himself clearly without exaggeration or denial. Humility is not self-hatred. It is self-awareness. It is recognizing dependence on God without losing confidence in his calling. Pride often disguises itself as confidence, but true confidence does not resist instruction. Pride rejects correction because it equates correction with weakness. God breaks this mindset by placing a man in situations where learning becomes unavoidable. Failure becomes a teacher, and mistakes become mirrors through these experiences. Humility is formed not through shame, but through understanding. The man learns that growth requires openness, not defensiveness. Humility creates teachability. A humble man listens before he speaks and learns before he leads. God values teachable hearts because they can be shaped. Instruction flows where humility, thank you, exists. God's voice becomes clearer to those who are willing to admit they do not know everything. This teachability becomes a safeguard, protecting the man from repeating errors and making decisions based on ego rather than wisdom. As humility deepens, defensiveness fades. The need to justify actions, explain motives, or protect reputation weakens. God teaches the man that identity does not need constant defense when it is secure in him. This freedom allows correction to be received without offense. A humble man can be corrected without being crushed because his worth is not tied to perfection. Humility also reshapes leadership. Leadership rooted in pride seeks control, recognition, and dominance. Leadership rooted in humility seeks service, growth, and responsibility. God builds leaders who understand that authority is not about being above others, but about being accountable. A humble leader carries responsibility without entitlement and influence without manipulation. God entrusts more to the humble because humility creates safety. Power in the hands of pride destroys, but power in the hands of humility builds. A man who acknowledges his dependence on God will seek guidance rather than act impulsively. This caution is not fear, it is wisdom. God can trust a man who knows his need for him. Humility also strengthens relationships. Pride isolates, but humility connects. A humble man listens with empathy and responds with understanding. He does not compete for attention or position because he knows his value is secure. This relational health becomes essential as INFL. UNS grows. God ensures humility is established so relationships are preserved under pressure. Through humility, patience develops. A man no longer rushes to prove himself. He understands timing and respects process. God teaches him that promotion comes from alignment, not ambition. Waiting becomes possible because trust has replaced urgency. Humility allows a man to move at God's pace without frustration. In the end, humility is not the absence of strength, but the proper use of it. A humble man can be strong without being harsh and confident without being arrogant. God builds such men because they reflect his heart. Humility keeps a man grounded when success comes and steady when challenges arise. What God builds on humility endures. Pride may produce quick results, but humility produce lasting fruit. By establishing humility as the foundation, God ensures that everything built on it remains stable, fruitful, and aligned with his purpose. God never releases a blessing without first preparing the vessel that must carry it. This is why the breaking is not optional in the process of becoming. Blessing without preparation becomes a burden, and elevation without formation leads to collapse. God understands that success magnifies whatever is already present in a man's heart. If pride, insecurity, impatience, or fear remain unaddressed, blessing will expose them in destructive ways. The breaking is God's mercy, ensuring that what he gives will not destroy the one who receives it. Many desire the outcome without enduring the process. They want influence without integrity, visibility without maturity, and reward without refinement. God, however, is more committed to a man's preservation than his promotion. He delays blessing until character is strong enough to sustain it. This delay is not denial, it is preparation. God would rather take time to shape a man than rush him into a position that will cost him everything. The breaking develops endurance, which is essential for sustaining blessing. Initial success often comes with excitement and energy, but long-term responsibility requires stamina. God builds endurance through trials, delays, and resistance. These experiences teach a man how to remain faithful when enthusiasm fades. Endurance ensures that blessing is not abandoned when it becomes demanding. Integrity is another critical outcome of the breaking. Integrity is formed when obedience is chosen without immediate reward. God tests faithfulness in hidden places before granting public. I see responsibility. A man who remains consistent when no one is watching proves that his commitment is genuine. This consistency becomes the backbone of integrity, protecting the man when temptation arises. Blessing without integrity becomes a trap, but blessing anchored in integrity becomes a testimony. The breaking also produces discernment. A man learns to distinguish between opportunity and distraction. Not every open door is divine, and not every delay is rejection. Through the process of breaking, discernment sharpens. God teaches the man to listen before acting and to weigh decisions carefully. This wisdom protects the blessing from being wasted on poor choices. Patience is formed as well. Blessing often unfolds over time, not all at once. Without patience, a man may misuse what God gives by forcing outcomes or rushing processes. The breaking teaches respect for timing. A patient man understands that growth requires seasons and that preservation is more valuable than speed. This patience ensures that blessing grows rather than implodes. The breaking also stabilizes identity. When identity is rooted in God rather than success, blessing loses its power to define or control. A man who knows who he is apart from what he has cannot be easily shaken by loss or inflated by gain. God establishes this identity so blessing becomes a tool rather than a master. Stability and identity allows a man to steward success without being consumed by I. As God rebuilds the man, fear is replaced with confidence grounded in faith. The fear of failure diminishes because the man has already survived loss. The fear of success fades because the heart is secure. God prepares the man to carry blessing with humility and courage. This balance is essential for longevity. When blessing finally comes, it rests on a strong foundation. The man carries responsibility without panic and influence without pride. He understands that the blessing is not a reward for perfection, but a result of preparation. He remains teachable, grounded, and aware of his dependence on God. Looking back, the breaking becomes a point of gratitude rather than resentment. The man recognizes that without the process, the blessing would have broken him. God's wisdom is revealed. D, in the timing, the shaping, and the restraint. The blessing does not overwhelm because the man has been built to carry it. In the end, the breaking ensures sustainability. God builds men who can stand under the weight of blessing without losing their soul. What God gives does not destroy what he has formed. The breaking made room for blessing, and the preparation ensured it would last.